All these influencers out there are currently showing you their morning mushroom coffee routine or sprinkling in some greens powders to their morning smoothie and selling it as the solution to solve all of your energy problems and even help with your mood and probably your performance and your recovery as well. But what I'm here to tell you is that the vast majority of those products are not going to be helping your energy or your long-term performance goals. In fact, if you're chasing the next supplement fad, instead of getting the basics right, then you might be wasting not just your money, but also your performance. Hi, I'm James Hudson, and I'm a sport nutritionist and runner, as well as father and husband. And I'm actually a registered sport nutritionist. And what that means is I'm registered on the Sport and Exercise Nutrition Registry Board. So we have to follow a code of conduct or a code of ethics. And it's against that code of ethics to promote any sort of sport nutrition product for financial gain. So you won't see me flogging the latest thing just so I can earn a quick buck. Instead, what I try and do on my video or my YouTube channel is to try and create evidence-informed, unsponsored videos to help runners and busy professionals feel empowered and informed with their nutritional choices, to lift their energy so that they don't become slaves to diets or the marketing hype. Today, I'm breaking down supplements that will actually move the needle, but importantly, the ones that are backed by research. The ones that will help you run faster, recover better, and have good energy in your general day-to-day life. So if you stick around to the end, you're going to understand which supplements I recommend most frequently to my clients, but more importantly, why. And if you understand that why, then you'll also know whether you would gain benefit from using them too. We're also going to look at some of the supplements I get asked most about, some of the ones that are potentially helpful in the right context. So we're going to have a conversation around that context because, like always, if you understand that context, you'll also know whether that supplement could help you move the needle. The goal of this video, therefore, is so that you have a deeper knowledge on supplements so that you can be critical when something drops into your inbox or flashes up on your Instagram page and you can think, that's going to be a complete waste of money for me. Or actually, I'm going to give that a go, but I'm going to do it in the right way, because I'm going to explain dosages as well as how to do it properly. Let's get into it. All right, so before we get into the good stuff, I want to explain that as a registered sport nutritionist, we always have a food first approach. So that means we're trying to get all of the nutrients that we need from food, but a food first approach doesn't necessarily mean a food only approach, because sometimes supplements can be helpful and potentially practical, or may also help turn the dial or give you that little bit of extra benefit once you've got all the basics right. Now, this video is not on building the basics, it is on, once you've got those built, what little things might give you that extra little bump. Now, when I was working out how to make this video, I was gonna rank the supplements in order of A, B, C, D, and I thought, actually, that's a bit ridiculous, because what does that even mean? Do you take a supplement that's a B or a C, or do you not take those, but you take the ones that are an A? So what you really need to know is, should I take the supplement or not? And that decision is going to be based on whether that supplement is going to give you value. So what my plan is to explain the supplement, whether it could give you value or not, and then hopefully you're going to be able to make up your own mind as to whether you build it into your routine. So the first supplement that I recommend most to my clients is vitamin D. Now, vitamin D is technically a hormone, and low levels are linked to poor recovery, poor bone health, and increased chances of picking up coughs and colds through the winter months. Now, whether you need to take this is really, you take it if you're going to be low. However, whether you're going to be low is really based on where you live around the world. If you live somewhere where there are long nights, long winter nights, where the sun doesn't get high enough up in the sky, because if the sun isn't going over 30, 35 degrees, then what that means is this sort of height, then it's not strong enough for your body to be able to synthesize the vitamin D it needs. So if you're living on the equator, the sun's nice and high, nice powerful rays, you're going to get lots of vitamin D. But if you're living somewhere in the UK or Canada or northern parts of America, you probably will need to supplement with vitamin D through winter. Now in the UK, it's actually a government recommendation to supplement with vitamin D through the winter months. And that is because it's highly likely that you will be low in February if you don't. Now, I've watched a few videos of people sort of talking about vitamin D and saying, well, is it a bit of a scam because suddenly now there's loads of vitamin D testing products and vitamin D supplements. But I've got to a point where I've got to December and taken a vitamin D test when I wasn't supplementing, and yeah, I was a bit low. So I do think supplementing with vitamin D is a good idea, even if you work outside, and that's because the sun just doesn't get high enough up in the sky. In the summer months, If you've got half an hour of sun exposure just on your forearms, that's going to be enough. But in winter, we spend more time inside and the sun doesn't get high enough. So I do think supplementing with vitamin D is a good idea. How much do you need? Government recommendation is 400 IUs daily. What I tend to do is take 1,000, just so you've got that ever so slight buffer. And then actually, if you take one every other day, because vitamin D is fat soluble, so that means it will get stored. If you take one every other day, you're still getting enough. There might be rationale to take a higher dose if you were very low. So the upper limit of the non-toxic dose is going to be 10,000 IUs, but more is not always better. So just so it says 5,000 IUs on the label, I wouldn't go for that one if you started supplementing in, say, October or November. So start supplementing October, go right through to the end of March. Then you know that your vitamin D levels will have stayed optimal throughout those winter months. Just to link in that food first approach, vitamin D can be found in oily fish and mushrooms. However, you would need to eat a huge amount of both mushrooms and oily fish to be able to get what you need through the winter months, hence supplementing. Second one is creatine. Now, creatine can get a bit of a bad rap in the endurance space because it's very much seen as a bodybuilding, strength, power supplement. And there's a bit of logic to why that's the case, because it's helping regenerate phosphocreatine in the adenosine triphosphate ATP PC phosphocreatine system, which is our energy system for short, sharp, explosive movements, 0 to 10 seconds. So let's say you were to go for a run, but you do some strides where you go for a sprint to the nearest lamppost, for example. And let's say you do multiples of those. Well, by having supplemental phosphocreatine, by having a bigger store of creatine in your body, it means that you recycle that system a little bit faster. So you might have slightly better quality in the latter half of those sprints. That's going to be good because better quality and faster sprinting, that's going to help drive the stimulus in that training and give you more adaptation. But why is it seen as a bodybuilding one? Because, well, that 0 to 10 seconds, that's probably our explosive movements, that's our lifting, that's our strength work. So let's say you were in the gym and you're doing some squats. If you're going to be doing squats to fatigue and you're lifting heavy, maybe it's like 80-90% of your 1 rep max. You're doing heavy squats, but if you're normally fatiguing at sort of number 6, if you've got creatine, it might just allow you to get to that 7 because you've got a little bit more energy in that short, sharp energy system. If you do that over multiple weeks, over multiple months, then actually you're getting a series of extra repetitions. And it's those extra repetitions performed with better quality that's going to give you a bigger signal. And it's that signal, it's that stimulus that's driving the growth and the adaptation seen. So taking phosphocreatine isn't magically going to make you have big muscles. It might just allow you to train that little bit harder or train a little bit more. Could you just, this is me playing devil's advocate here, could you just do an extra session or an extra amount of reps, an extra set, a different exercise to get that? Probably. So I would always make sure that you've got structured training overload in your program before trying to really have a load of creatine to see a sort of magic benefit. Make sure that your programming, your strength work and your training is really nailed down before relying on creatine to give you that added benefit. If you have got a structured training program though, and you want to experiment with creatine, then let's go for it. It's very limited or very little downsides of taking creatine. The only potential downside I can see is that there might be a slight increase in body weight. That might be 1, max 2% body weight change increase. And that comes from the phosphocreatine, it's going to be stored with water. So it means you might just have a little bit more body water on you. That's not extra fat mass, but it is weight. So if you're doing an ultra marathon, for example, and you're really concerned about all the weight on your body, then, I mean, you've probably got to be much like top of the table to really be that concerned about that. But then it might be worth not having creatine in the weeks prior. But it's likely that if you're watching this, you're probably not the top 5% and you're much more like an average Joe runner like me, in which case, try it, see how you get on. Creatine's really having its time now because it crosses the blood-brain barrier. So what that means is it might have an effect on cognition, as it could actually act as an energy source for the brain if we're under fatigue. Now, the people I tend to work with are busy, are juggling jobs as well as family and training. So there's a lot of demand for energy in the brain, especially if we're maybe not fueling quite as optimally as we might want to. So creatine could have a slight benefit there. Personally, I've never experienced that extra clarity, but that's not to say you won't. What I would try then is, if you're interested in trying this supplement, 1, that you've got a structured training program, 2, that you're going to be ready for some sort of extra clarity. Now, how to take it? You could take a loading dose, which would be 20 grams for 4 or 5 days, and then dropping to a maintenance dose. If you do that, I would recommend splitting that 20-gram dose into 4 over the day. So you'd have one in the morning, mid-afternoon, and evening, each 5 grams. However, personally, I wouldn't actually recommend that. That's a bit of a faff. What I would recommend doing is going straight to the maintenance dose, either 3 or 5 grams of creatine per day. So then you can just have it once a day, have it with carbohydrate, and ideally have it after exercise, so that because you've just excited GLUT4, you've got some movement in your carbohydrate transporters. If you're then having creatine with carbohydrate, it's more likely to get channeled back through that transporter and stored into the muscle cell. You may get more benefit if you are a plant-based eater, because creatine can be found in the diet, but it's in animal products and animal meats. You may see more benefit with supplementing with creatine if you're a vegan or vegetarian athlete, because meat eaters, those who eat a lot of meat, that is where creatine can be found in the diet. So it might be that your stores were not as low, but it might be that supplementing just brings you up to fully saturated, and you therefore get that slight extra benefit. Whereas if you are really low at the start, then supplementing will bring you back up. You might see slightly more benefit. Number 3 is caffeine when timed right. So caffeine improves focus, improves memory, recall, as well as reducing the perceived effort of the sessions. Now, what that means is, if you're running and it feels like you're running at an 8 out of 10, caffeine might allow you to run actually at an 8 out of 10, but it might feel like a 7 out of 10. So you're able to sort of push that limit a little bit more. If you've also got better memory and you're a little bit more focused, if you're doing something where there's skill element to it, so if you're really practicing your running form, it might enable you to have slightly better form throughout the entirety of the session. Therefore, you're getting better quality out of that session. That might drive adaptation. So there's a strong reason to experiment with caffeine. However, I recommend that we do it strategically. What I recommend then is not relying on caffeine every morning to wake up. If that's the case, we need to get back to basics. We need to look at sleep-wake time, duration of sleep, and food that's enabling your recovery basics. I always recommend using caffeine as a performance aid, which it can be, like I've just explained, but picking 1, 2, 3 sessions a week and using it then to really get the most out of those sessions. If you're using caffeine as a always before my session, then you're not necessarily going to see or feel the benefit. So pick a session where you want to really go for it and then use caffeine. However, I would recommend not doing the sessions in the evening. So even if you've got a really hard session where there's a quality element to it on a Thursday evening at Run Club, I still wouldn't recommend having a massive wallop of caffeine at 6, 7 p.m. because of the half-life of caffeine. And what that means is the half-life is how long it takes for your body to metabolize half of the amount. And caffeine is between 5 to 8 hours. So if you were to have a double espresso before your evening session, or a monster, which is about 200 milligrams of caffeine, then 5 to 8 hours later, you've still got half the amount in your system. So let's say you had a monster at 7 p.m., 200 milligrams, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. By midnight, you've still got 100 milligrams of caffeine in your system. So even if you were able to get to bed at 11, half 11, you've still got that caffeine circulating, and that is going to have a negative impact on sleep quality. Caffeine can be great for morning sessions when you really want to push, or for practicing your race day caffeine strategy. So if you know that you get on okay with caffeine, you've used it before, you didn't get too jittery, you didn't get too anxious or sort of fluttery or even a bit wobbly, then you want to be able to practice what you're going to do on race day. Now, the evidence to support caffeine is having between 3 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight, but minimal effective dose might be about 1. So if you're really caffeine sensitive, I wouldn't recommend going straight to 3 milligrams per kilogram body weight. So let's say you are 70 kilograms, 3 would be 70, 140, 210. So I wouldn't go straight to 200 milligrams if you've never had caffeine before, because that might feel like quite a lot. Instead, maybe start with 100 and see how you get on, or 50 and see how you get on with that. You might be able to find that in a caffeine supplement or even a caffeine gel. When I say a caffeine supplement, like a tablet or even a chewing gum. What you need to do though is, instead of thinking about the race, you need to practice this in training. So when you're doing your long run, hopefully one of them once a week, once every other week, you're going to both practice race nutrition, but also you can practice your caffeine strategy because you want to know how the two are going to work together. So you might say, I'm going to have my coffee 2 hours before with breakfast to help all of that settle and feel good. And then I'm going to have another caffeine product at 30 minutes before I start. The reason for that is caffeine hits in the system after about 30 to 45 minutes. Then it's going to have that slow drop off with the half-life. So you need to know the amount of milligrams of caffeine that you're going to have, and then you need to experiment and find out what works for you. You need to know the quantity of caffeine that you're going to have and how you're going to have it, so what products, and you need to know your timings. That will enable you to have a caffeine strategy that you can trust and reproduce ahead of race day. If you're curious as to the caffeine strategy I used ahead of my 3-hour marathon in Edinburgh, feel free to click the link and watch this video afterwards. Because caffeine is so effective, because it's a legal drug, it's added to a lot of other supplement products to make you feel like you're getting some sort of benefit when the other ingredients are in there and they may not be providing as much benefit. Key example here, and I feel like I'm going in on Space Goods a little bit, but let's just look at their branding. Oh, it looks really neat, looks really cool, but what's actually in this product? So we've got it giving you focus, productivity, and energy. Now, caffeine will do that. There's science suggesting that caffeine does do that. But this is a mushroom product, and that's like the key thing that they're really selling it for. Lots of ingredients of mushrooms in here. You've got cordyceps, we've got chaga mushroom, we've got lion's mane, but they've also put natural caffeine from coffee extract, putting natural to make it sound like it's a little bit more friendly, but caffeine is the key ingredient in here. So that's why if you take this and you feel a little bit more alert, that's coming from the caffeine. There's very limited evidence supporting the use of mushrooms for giving you any sort of energy or productivity, or if there are research papers out there suggesting that, there's just as many, if not more, against it. So as a registered sport nutritionist, I can't recommend the use of mushroom products. Not until there is a meta-analysis done and the weight of evidence is saying, yes, these are good, they're also safe, and they're giving a performance aid. So this is a little tip for you to be critical with supplements. Actually, instead of being blown away by the call outs, so these things like focus, productivity, I want you to look at the ingredients. Is there caffeine listed on there? Now that might be in a variety of different forms. It might be green tea extract, it might be guarana extract, it might be natural caffeine. That's probably the thing that is actually making you feel different. If that's the case, instead of taking this to give you energy, use caffeine, but use it strategically. Supplement number 4 is electrolytes, but probably not how you expect me to recommend them. So you're probably thinking, right, if you're going for a run, you need to take electrolytes. That's gonna help with hydration, right? Wrong. Electrolytes could help with hydration if you need them. What does that mean? If you are sweating enough over a long enough duration and are also consuming enough fluid to replace enough of that water, that it's going to drive your fluid balance in a way where you need to consume sodium to help balance that, then I'm going to recommend electrolytes. That only normally comes if you've been running for over 3.5–4 hours and you've been drinking a lot of water, plain water. So it's more for those in the ultra space. If you're doing a marathon 4 hours and under, it's unlikely that you actually need electrolytes during. However, why am I recommending electrolytes then? I may recommend a product like this, doesn't necessarily have to be this brand, something that is going to give you 1,500 milligrams of sodium per litre. So if you have 750 milligrams of sodium in 500 millilitres, you've got a high strength electrolyte drink. If you drink that the evening before and the morning of your run, because it's high strength, it's going to increase your fluid retention. So what that means is you're effectively going to be hyper, so a lot, you're going to be very well hydrated, hyperhydrated. That means effectively you've got a slightly bigger cooling system going into your run or your race. This can be really helpful if you're running in hot conditions because you're actually going to be better able to tolerate that heat. I highly recommend this strategy, but as always, I would recommend testing it and seeing how you get on in practice. If you're concerned whether you specifically need electrolytes during your race, because that's going to be dependent on fluid loss, fluid intake, and sweat sodium concentration, then what you need to do is click the link that I'll add in the comments, because I've got a video going into a lot more detail on how to calculate and personalize your hydration and electrolyte strategy. Supplement number 5 is omega-3s, with the brackets that if you don't have enough oily fish coming into your diet. So, oily fish coming into your diet, how do you know if you have enough of those? Well, firstly, we need to know what oily fish are. So they're typically the ones that taste quite fishy, if that makes sense. Things like sardines, mackerel, anchovy, salmon, and herring. So there I've listed an acronym, SMASH. That's going to be a good way to remember it. Sardines, mackerel, anchovy, salmon, herring. And then we've also got trout, but that doesn't fit my acronym. Remember, tuna is not an oily fish, so we want to try and be focusing on some of those 5 or 6 that I've just mentioned there. If you can have 2 or maybe 3 portions of those coming in most weeks, then you're going to be getting all the essential fatty acids that you need, and therefore need to supplement. That is, unless you've also got an additional rationale. So what would that rationale be? You're going through a competition block where there's a huge amount of training stress, and stress coming from the event itself. And then you've maybe got another event coming up very soon, and you need to do everything you can to reduce the inflammation and recover as best you can. So potentially, if you have, let's say, a race and then a race the following weekend, or even 2 weekends apart, you might want to take some omega-3s then to help manage and offset the stress from the first event. In which case you'd go with a high dose EPA, because that's going to help with the joint health. If, however, you've got a high stress event coming from an injury, so because injuries are going to create a lot of inflammation, potentially having some anti-inflammatory dietary agents like omega-3s could be helpful there. So if I were to break my knee or do my MCL, which I did, I would have then used a high dose EPA, because that's going to help with joint health. DHA though is the one that's going to be particularly helpful for brain health. So when I worked in rugby, we had a protocol that if client went through concussion, they would have a protocol where they would have quite a high dose DHA omega-3 for, I think it was 2 months afterwards. That would be having 2 grams of DHA daily. So it's a very high dose. So it's looking at the supplement that you're taking and seeing how much EPA and DHA is in those. Otherwise, if you're in the bracket where you're just not eating any oily fish at all, I would recommend supplementing and having 2 grams of just total omega-3s, unless you're trying to do something specific, like recover from an injury, where you might want 2 grams of 2 grams of EPA, or if you're recovering from concussion, where you might want to have 2 grams of DHA. What's the food first approach, James? Well, think about those oily fish. What's ways that you can actually build them in that you might like them? So maybe you have some salmon or maybe some smoked salmon on a bagel for brunch. Could you also try smoked mackerel? You can potentially make that into a pate just by mixing some Greek yogurt, a squeeze of lemon, and a bit of black pepper. It makes a really nice pate that you can then add to sandwiches or wraps. Or actually it works really nicely in a toasty too. Instead of having scrambled eggs for brunch, could you do kippers on a brunch Sunday where you've got that little bit of extra time? Have something different to help give your body that hit of omega-3s without having to supplement. I know those oily fish flavors aren't for everyone, hence why we might need to supplement. Supplement number 6 is one that you likely take already. However, you might not be taking it in the right way. So I'm going to explain how you can actually do it and get the most from it. But before I do that, I want to explain a little bit about the Performance Accelerator coaching program, which is the coaching program I run to enable clients to lift their energy levels and build their sport nutrition knowledge long term. So we have 10 conversations where we build specific action points that are relatable to you, that you can apply and fit within your lifestyle, your routine. It might be that you already have some good nutrition basics, which is fantastic, but actually they might not be serving you as well because you've started training more. So what we need to do is apply some sport nutrition best practices and then make sure it works within your routine. So we address knowledge gaps and we look at habits, enabling you to change your trajectory so that you get to a point where this time next year, you're still reaping the reward from the 10 weeks that we've done. And in essence, all of that benefit is now just compounding over time. That is the goal of the Performance Accelerator. And if you want a little bit more information about it, I'll put a link to have a chat with me in the notes. So number 6 is carb and protein powders as well as gels. So these are technically supplements. However, I find a lot of the time people aren't necessarily using them the right way. They might be saving the carb powders or the gels just for race day and they haven't trained their gut to be able to tolerate that high level. So what we need to do is pick a few sessions in your week where you're going to start practicing race nutrition. So I want you to start gradually building the amount of carbohydrate that you have per hour. That might be in the form of gels or powdered carbohydrates, which you make into a drink, and then training with that, so that when it gets to race day, you've actually had more carbohydrate than you will do on race day. So then you get to race day and your body's like, wow, okay, I've had way more than this, so now I'm not going to have any GI issues. So practice at race pace, practice with high carb. It's going to fuel performance. These products are not gimmicks. In terms of protein powders, these can be helpful if you aren't consuming enough protein already. So just taking protein powders isn't going to be a magic bullet that's suddenly going to make you recover well and put on muscle mass. No, it's going to help lift your total protein intake. So if you're already having ample protein, it's not going to really help you. However, if you aren't having ample protein, and again, we should probably classify our terms here, I would recommend that you want to try and get up to a high protein intake. That is 1.6 to 2 grams per kilogram body weight. So if you're currently having 1 gram per kilogram body weight protein across the day, maybe even 1.2, then adding a supplement could be an easy way to actually get that up. But before you do that, and this is the food first approach, instead of having that being your first approach, let's review your dietary habits with protein. Do you have habits that are meaning that sometimes you have 0.8, 1, 1.2 instead of consistently 1.6? Or if you're consistently in the say 1.4 range, would just adding a protein shake before bed, like a casein one for example, or having a whey product with your overnight oats just to lift it up and give you an extra 20 grams of protein. If that's going to help you consistently get into the right range, then it could be a good product for you. Regarding the type of protein powder, the literature has recently changed towards the type being less important. Just getting a protein powder in is going to be the key thing. Don't worry too much about the amino acid profile. If you are getting enough protein, 1.6 to 2 grams per kilogram body weight, don't worry about the amino acid profile. So go with one based on taste. Righto, this next part are supplements that I frequently get asked about, or supplements that might have a benefit to you depending on the context. So if there were some that you were thinking of, oh James, they weren't in that 6 that you normally recommend. Okay, they might be in this one, but I want you to know when to take them, how to take them, and why you should be taking them if you actually have a rationale. So let's get into it. The first one is going to be magnesium. Now, I hear so much about magnesium. So many supplement brands are touting magnesium for its recovery benefits, for its sleep benefits. And having worked in the supplement industry and being a product developer, so being asked to, right, James, can you make something with magnesium so we can do X, Y, Z? I actually got into the research for this, and the vast majority of the research around magnesium and sleep quality is based in those with sleep apnea or the elderly. So the research papers where they show some sort of beneficial impact on sleep quality, it's the elderly or those struggling with sleep. So if you are a healthy individual and don't have a sleep disorder, it's unlikely that magnesium is actually going to help your sleep quality. So if you think you're getting a benefit, it could well be a placebo benefit. Even if you take it and you have those like strange dreams or weirdly memorable dreams, that's not to say that it's actually helping improve your sleep quality. So be critical with that. And I would say with sleep, you just want to address the basics first. So sleep wake time, getting enough hours, not eating too close to bedtime, reducing caffeine intake in the afternoon are going to be your key drivers. Magnesium supplements could be a benefit though if you're low in magnesium. So if you are suboptimal in magnesium, one, we're going to try and address why. Are you not eating a wide enough range of foods? Whole grains, meat, veg, seafood, shellfish, fantastic sources of magnesium. So dietary range, dietary color, that's going to be our basics to help get magnesium up. But if you are low and therefore require a supplement, that could be a benefit. How do you know that you're low? You would take a bloods test. If this blood test also flags iron, then supplementing with iron could be a benefit. Now, if you're an at-risk category, this might be if you're a female runner, if you're menstruating. So iron would be a great supplement if you are low in iron. So how do you know that you're low? Well, maybe you've got some symptoms like lightheadedness, dizziness, tiredness, and fatigue. If that's the case, instead of just taking some iron supplements, what I'd recommend doing is getting an iron test. So this is going to be less expensive than getting a full bloods panel. You can get one like 39, 41 pounds, or you can even just go to Boots. However, the Boots one a lot cheaper, but you don't get quite as much information. Getting one where you know exactly your serum ferritin, I would recommend as being more helpful. So sure, £10 one from Boots, going to be great. It will tell you if you're low, but it won't give you your exact serum ferritin. Whereas if you can afford to get one, which is £41, I think there's one from Forth. Again, not affiliated to promote that one, so I'll put a couple of different links in the notes on this video, but that will tell you your serum ferritin number. Why that's going to be helpful is because it will tell you at what stage of iron deficiency you are. Now, Peeling et al. Tried to quantify the stages of iron deficiency. So there's been some research into classifying the stages of iron deficiency. So basically, there's been some research trying to classify the stages of iron deficiency. So if you know your serum ferritin number, then you might know at what stage of iron deficiency you're in, and therefore how aggressive you need to be with bringing yourself back up. You'll also know if you're not iron deficient, but are maybe on the slippery slope towards becoming iron deficient. For example, the first stage of iron deficiency, according to Sim et al. 2019 and Peeling, who tried to apply this to athletic populations, they found that between 35 UGs per litre and 22 would be classified as stage 1, 22 down to 12 as stage 2, and less than 12 as stage 3. But anything less than 50, if you're an athletic individual, I would class that as in the sort of danger zone. So you don't want to get down to the point where you are less than 35. So it might be worth addressing your iron habits, maybe not supplementing, but addressing your iron habits if you're less than 50. If you are less than 35 though, that's when we might see benefit from supplementing. Now, a few tips around iron supplementation that I've worked with my clients and seen good results with is a lot of the time the side effect or downside of iron supplements are going to be constipation or feeling like you've been a bit bunged up. How do we manage that? Well, there's some interesting evidence coming out in the literature showing a different supplement approach. Instead of having that iron supplement, which might be 60 milligrams of elemental iron every day, so that might be 200 milligrams of ferrous sulfate. Instead of having that every single day, you can actually half the dose by having it every other day, because there's some research showing that when you take iron, it increases something called hepcidin, which blunts the absorption. So if that effect lasts 24 hours, the second dose that you have is going to be not absorbed all that well. So by taking it every other day, you don't actually reduce the amount of absorption a huge amount, but you take half the dose. So that means you're going to probably have half the side effects. So you don't feel quite as bunged up, but you still get a lot of the benefit. I've used this approach with clients with great success in combination with addressing iron habits from food. Now, instead of doing a short supplemental window of say 4 weeks, 6 weeks, I would do a much longer window of up to say 18 weeks. Follow that supplement protocol where you're having the supplement every other day in combination with eating more high iron foods. That should bring you up neatly. Just to labor this point, don't take iron supplements if you don't know that you're low. We're going to test, not guess. The next supplement I get asked about is beta-alanine. Now, this is the product that they normally put into pre-workouts to give you that feeling of the tingles. Now, what this supplement does is it increases your buffering capacity. So basically your body's ability to tolerate acid or lactate. So it will help if you're training within the 1 to 4 minute range with like really hard, intense exercise in that sort of time span, or if your event lasts about that time. But what I see is that most people don't take this supplement the right way because they might rely on their pre-workout to actually get it in. Let's think about it. If you're taking a pre-workout 3-4 times a week, and you probably just take one of them, then you'll get the 4 gram dose of beta-alanine. That's not going to be enough to actually load up your body full of beta-alanine to increase muscle carnosine, which is the rate limiting factor of its buffering capacity. So if you do want to experiment with beta-alanine because you think, hey, I do a lot of training in the really intense 1 to 4 minute range and I'm excited by trying out a new supplement, what I'd recommend doing is aiming for 6 to 8 grams per day and doing this for 4 weeks. So we don't want to have a product that's also got loads of caffeine in, because that's going to mean we're intaking a lot of caffeine. So you just want to get beta-alanine and then you want to split the dose across the day. because if you take a large dose of say 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 grams in one hit, as that will help avoid you getting the tingly feeling. So the research recommends that your dose should be 4 lots of 2 grams. So you do breakfast, mid-morning, mid-afternoon and dinner, and just getting that in across the day. But again, it's a bit of a pain as a supplement goes, because you've got to do that split dose for 4 weeks. So it's quite a commitment to really lift up your body's muscle carnosine content. I tend not to recommend beta-alanine for most of my individuals, because actually you're going to see much bigger bang for your bucks by focusing on the other basics. However, if you are top of the pyramid, you're one of my elite athletes, and you already have all that other stuff absolutely nailed down, your training program is absolutely nailed on, then it might be something worth experimenting with, because hey, you might then have a little bit more time to make sure that you can actually get that dose in 6 to 8 grams every day, split up for 4 weeks. Sodium bicarbonate is another supplement I get asked about a lot, but I tend to reserve this for athletes that are very much at the top of the performance pyramid, because it's going to result in some sort of very marginal gain, if at all. There is evidence to support its efficacy, so it's a supplement that there is a body of research behind saying, hey, this does work. However, for the average Joe, I think it's not going to move the needle very much. So it's only when you're really at the top of your game when those really marginal gains might become worth it. If that's the case though, and you're thinking, well, James, there is evidence supporting it, I'm keen to experiment, and my sport is short, sharp and intense, and I do repeated bouts in my training a lot, how do I use it properly? Then we want to go for a dose of 0.2 to 0.4 grams per kilogram body weight. How do you actually get that? I would recommend using the Morton product, because it's not just one serving size. If you go on their site, then you adjust your body weight and your experience level, and it will then come up with a dose. And I found that for my athletes, they tend to sit within the range that I've recommended just there. This is another product that works on the buffering capacity, so your ability to tolerate lactate. What most of the evidence suggests though, is that it helps most with repeated bouts. So actually, if you're a sprint athlete, for example, if you're just doing one race, it might not be as advantageous as if you're doing multiple races and heats over the day. It peaks in the system after 60 minutes to 2.5 hours. So I'd recommend taking it about an hour before your session. Now, sodium bicarb can be a difficult one for tummy trouble, GI issues. So how do you get around that? If you take it with a little bit of carbohydrate, it can help mellow it. Or there's also research suggesting to split the dose up. So I mentioned there 60 minutes, but if you take it 2 hours to 60 minutes and you break it up into multiple feedings with bits of carbohydrate, then it should mellow the impact on your gut. BCAAs, these are another supplement I get asked about a lot. Should I be taking these? They're in my pre-workout. Do I need them? Now, BCAAs are the branched chain amino acids. So they're the 3 amino acids that are branched in their nature. So they are leucine, isoleucine and valine. Now, out of those 3, really it's leucine that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting. There's a hypothesis of having a leucine threshold or leucine trigger. So leucine basically is the amino acid that gets all the other ones together and helps generate a robust muscle protein synthesis spike. Now, do you need to supplement with additional leucine? The answer to that is no, if you are already eating a high protein diet. If you're having 1.6 to 2 grams per kilogram body weight protein over the day, and having additional BCAAs and more leucine isn't going to have any benefit at all, so you're literally just weeing out all of that additional supplement. Where BCAAs might have a benefit is that if you're not consuming that, because having some additional leucine to try and really generate muscle protein synthesis, when you don't have the big building blocks coming in from enough protein to generate it, it might salvage some of your muscle protein synthesis response. But really, instead of supplementing with BCAAs then, I'd probably recommend 1, addressing protein habits to lift it up, and 2, having a protein powder, because then you're going to get leucine as well as more amino acids to lift up your total protein intake. The other rationale to supplement with BCAAs is if you are doing long endurance sports. If you're doing that whilst eating in a caloric deficit, because then we've got 2 things that are creating a lot of stress. So the caloric deficit creates stress, the endurance exercise itself also creates stress. If you're trying to do that, and then maybe we're also in our late luteal phase of your menstrual cycle, another stressful time, it's really stressful on the body. So having leucine, which is giving this signal for growth, recovery, anabolic signaling, it might help reduce some of that catabolic stress. Now, the body tends to use fat, carbohydrate during these prolonged bouts, but if you're going ultra, it will also use a little bit of protein. So it will break down the muscle ever so slightly. It's really not much, it's percentages instead of being huge amounts. But if you're having some additional BCAAs, then your body will use those instead of breaking the muscle down. So there could be a rationale there. The only time that I actually recommend BCAAs to clients are female clients who are doing ultra distance sports, and I might therefore recommend having some BCAAs during these, especially in their late luteal phase. Probiotics are another supplement that I get asked about a lot. Should I be taking these? Will it just improve my gut health? And I always come back to a food first approach and having habits. So building in more probiotic foods consistently to your diet instead of trying to have a probiotic supplement. The reason for that is I actually did some CPD in this space fairly recently, and it blew my mind a little bit because they explained that all brands that have a general purpose probiotic supplement, there's no evidence supporting that any of these have any sort of positive or beneficial or even lasting impact on the gut. So what's the point in taking them then if it's not going to have any benefit? Well, it's not going to stop marketeers claiming the benefits. However, what I want you to think about is, well, how do we do this the right way? So firstly, we need to have a rationale as to whether you should take a probiotic supplement. And there's a few different times when you might gain benefit. If that happens, then you also then need to take the right supplement. So you need to take one where there's science supporting its efficacy on these times. So what are these times, James? Well, the first one is if you're prescribed antibiotics. The second is if you have cold or flu symptoms. The third is if you've been prescribed antibiotics for bacterial vaginosis or antifungals for thrush. And the fourth is for soothing a fussy or colicky baby. These are the times where there's been research done and studies, randomized controlled trials, showing that specific strains of probiotics can have a benefit. So now, if you're in that space and you think, right, one of those 4 times might happen to me, we now need to find the right strain. And it's not just a case of taking a probiotic, because all probiotics are going to be made up of different strains. There is one brand of probiotic that I do respect and recommend, and that is called Smart Strains. So if clients have any of those 4 issues, then what we need to do is use Smart Strains because they actually have the quantity and the specific strains used in the research. So then you know that you're taking something which has been proven to work. I'll put a link to the poster so that you can have a look in that on the notes. The next supplement I get asked about a lot is beetroot juice or nitrates. So nitrates have been shown to improve running economy, and I think the main driver of this is vasodilation. So there is evidence to support nitrates working. However, we also need to think about the context. So it will work more for individuals who don't have a diet high in dietary nitrates already. So you find nitrate in the diet through things like beetroot, things like leafy greens, celery, cress, parsley, as well as celeriac and rocket. So if you're not eating all your leafy greens and lots of beetroot, your diet might be a little bit on the lower side of nitrate, in which case supplementing might help give you some sort of benefit. Now, the research shows that having between 300 to 600 milligrams of nitrate is going to be the dose that you want to have. And the way that you can take it is either an acute dose, in which you'd have it 2 hours before your session where you want to see and feel the benefit, or as a chronic dose, in which case you'd have it every day for 2 weeks and then also 2 hours before, so that you've built up your body's amount of circulating nitrate and then also hit it just before. Dietary nitrate is one I've experimented with, and personally I found that having steamed beetroot was the best way to get it in for me, because I've got a pretty high tolerance for drinking stuff I don't really like, but this really just isn't very tasty. So I found that eating the beetroot was a better way for me to do it. So you know those packs of 300 grams of steamed beetroot you can get in Tesco or Asda? Having one of those, and I had one of those with my salad as a late lunch when I used to commute in the city. I'd have it about 3 p.m. as like a little mini mid-afternoon, and then I'd cycle home at 5 p.m. So I timed it 2 hours before. And I was noticing that in the latter half of that cycle, where I had more of the elevation phase, I just feel quite good. I felt fresher than I maybe should, and that might have been in part because of some of the additional circulating nitrate. So you can either experiment with one of these or just have a lot of beetroot right before your session. A word of warning on nitrate supplements is that if you have very low blood pressure, it can actually reduce your blood pressure even further. So if you're prone to fainting or have low blood pressure, I wouldn't recommend this supplement. I would take it if you don't eat a huge amount of leafy greens. I may recommend this supplement if you already do a lot of the basics very well. So dietary nitrate could be one to experiment with. However, I would try and prioritize lifting up high nitrate foods first. Now let's remember, no capsule is going to make up for poor sleep, chronic stress, or poor recovery nutritional practices. Remember, the clue is in the name. Supplements are a supplement to a healthy diet. So let's nail the foundations before we play with any of the things that I've mentioned in the second half of this video. Remember, if you're curious about the Performance Accelerator coaching program and you want that little bit of extra guidance on leveling up your energy levels long term, then look at the link in the notes on this video. My final piece of advice is be critical with the supplements that you do take. Do you have a strong rationale as to why you're taking it? Do you know when to take it? And are you taking it to actually improve your performance? Or is it really just a hopeful magic bullet because you haven't built the base first? Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want my blueprint on how to structure your nutrition, click this video right here.